And so I suppose there will be questions asked about who was arrested and why and what the motive might be.
Yes, exactly. And I'm not sure anti-corruption is going to sell, considering the situation in Saudi Arabia in general and what the Crown Prince owns himself or has just owned in terms of boats and other things. But be that as it may, look, there's two things here, Mariam, that I think we have to pay attention to. One is the dramatic changes happening in Saudi Arabia and in Saudi policy within and without. And in that sense of drama, certainly this is not just a new chapter in Saudi Arabia. This is a whole new book, a whole new alphabet in the way Saudis rule their kingdom, in the way a new king, a new crown prince leads, in the way they deal with the rest of the family and the centers of power, and the way they deal with the economy, with oil, privatization, and so on and so forth. There's a whole new policy and politics taking place in the kingdom. On the other hand, and I think this is very important to pay attention to, is whether this is the committee, anti-corruption committee, whether it is floating Aramco in some new stock exchange, whether it is getting rid of this prince or that prince, or whether it is launching new wars. All of that is happening in secrecy. We don't know how they arrived at any one decision that whether it will cost hundreds of billions of dollars or whether it will put princes and former ministers in jail. There's a lot of secrecy taking place in the kingdom. Major decisions are being taken that really touch over the future, the destiny of the kingdom and indeed the region, but a lot of it is happening in secret.
And like you say, it's an interesting time for all these domestic changes to be taking place when there are multiple geopolitical threats facing the region. What does all this mean for Saudi Arabia's relationships with its neighbors and allies, new allies?
Well, certainly what we know for sure is that the incoming American president has given a push to the new royals in Saudi Arabia with his visit there and with the contracts worth hundreds of billions of dollars. And now, apparently, President Trump is asking the Saudis to float bits and pieces of Aramco in the New York Stock Exchange. And I think to a large degree, the new king and the new crown prince are banking on American support for whatever they do in the region, notably in their proxy conflict against Iran. So I would say, and a lot are arguing, that even the decision to have former Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri make his very bravado speech, if you will, in Riyadh is part and parcel of that new empowered, aggressive Saudi leadership supported by the United States against Iran. Now, having said that, internally, you could tell that there's a whole bunch of consultants, I mean, like the McKinsey boys kinds of consultants that are really advising or manipulating the crown prince into talking about these major economic changes in the kingdom, knowing all too well that he is an incredibly inexperienced person, very young, doesn't have that much of an experience in government or in economics for that matter. So really a lot of things are happening internally in the kingdom, or in terms of, as we said earlier, launching a war like in Yemen when he was, as a Minister of Defense, are not thought through. They're really done in secret. We don't know the consequences for them on the long term for the Saudi Arabia or for the region. So all in all, we're all at awe as to what's happening in Saudi Arabia and in terms of Saudi policy in the kingdom and in the region.
Yes, as you say, it's difficult to know maybe what to focus on and what not to read too much into, and particularly with the Iran-Saudi regional rivalry. This is nothing new. It's been going on for a long time. But is there a sense that the recent sort of positioning, maneuvering, rhetoric and narrative in the region is feeding into perhaps, might this new chapter that you talk about include greater confrontation with Iran?
Absolutely, there is something new, because we really cannot continue to say the same things we've been saying over the last 4 decades, certainly the last 3-4 years. certainly since the Arab Spring, that there is proxy conflict going on between Saudi Arabia and Iran. What happened this week that led to, for example, Saad al-Hariri announcing his resignation from Riyadh, the day after a high-level official, Mr. Wilayati, one of the most right-wing Iranian officials, an advisor to Khamenei, being in Lebanon, sitting with Saad al-Hariri. There's a lot of things happening today, and I would say two things to that, Mariam. One, clearly Iran is on the offensive. Clearly Iran has been making major advances in Iraq, in Syria, and in Lebanon, and arguably in Yemen. Clearly Iran feels its new strength with Assad regaining strength, with Abadi acting as he did in Iraq against ISIL, and with Hezbollah coming out victorious in whichever manner from Syria. So I think they're definitely taking that war or that expansion of influence into Lebanon. So certainly we have an Iranian component here. On the other hand, we have Saudi Arabia that is taking the offensive defensively, meaning it's been on the defensive for a long time, but now with a new ambitious and arguably reckless crown prince, they're taking their defense on the offense in Yemen, in the Gulf, and as we know, against Qatar, and now in Lebanon. And certainly from what we've seen over the last 2-3 years in Yemen, and what we've seen in terms of the new balance of terror that the Houthis are trying to establish with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia by shooting these ballistic missiles towards its cities, today towards Riyadh, that really the Saudi bet is failing, that there's a major strategic failure in Saudi Arabia. And yet, Saudi Arabia continues with its offensive against Iran in various parts of the region, hoping that the United States, perhaps Israel, I don't know, will step in and do something in Lebanon or in Yemen or in Iraq and elsewhere. So all in all, it's an open bet on Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is really moving internally against princes, against centers of powers in terms of the economy, as well as in the region in terms of conflicts and war and anti-terror and anti-Iran, and now in Lebanon, in a way that is very hard to calculate its consequences on the short or long term.
All right, well, but you've had a good stab at it. Thank you very much, Marwan Bishara.